All right. So now we're recording and everything. Cool. All right, so welcome to Structure and Function 1, PEPROF 201. I'm going to have to fight my normal tendencies and stay kind of close to the computer so the mic works. But anyway, hopefully everybody's in the right place. So always on the first day, one of the things that I do is to talk about kind of what you can expect from the class, what it is that we're going to do in here, and hopefully try to make the class a little bit more interesting for you. So first things first on that, if my slideshow will advance, let's see. Maybe. There we go. All right. So good question that you might ask is, what are we going to do in here? So you can see the catalog description up there, that the course is designed to study the basic anatomy and function of bones, muscles, and joints throughout the body. Through lectures and labs, emphasis will be placed on the interrelationships between the structure and function of the human body and its application to movement. Okay, that's fine. But what does that mean, right? So the gist of what we're going to try to do in this class, this is an intro anatomy class. And so we'll talk about basically the musculoskeletal system and the nervous system. So half of what we would have talked about in the old 271, we're going to cover in here, and we're just going to cover it in a whole lot more detail. And so the idea is that I want to give you a basic framework so that when you get to later classes, you can kind of build on that framework and things make more sense for you. So for example, we're going to talk about the basic structure of muscles. We'll talk about, the whole muscle and then eventually work our way down to muscle cell. We'll talk about how they contract, how the nervous interacts with them, and all of those kinds of things. Because when you get to 471, you're going to have to talk, or you will talk about, not have to, but you will talk about how muscles adapt to strength training, for example. But you'll and that cascade of signals allows for muscle growth. And none of that stuff in 471 is going to make sense unless you kind of understand the basic structure and function of a muscle cell under normal circumstances. So the idea in this class is to basically lay out for you introductory anatomy so that you can build on it later and talk about adaptations to exercise in later classes. So in terms of what we're going to do then, essentially the way I try to lay the class out is that I'll discuss some basic anatomy and physiology, and then I'll try to show you how to apply that. One of the things I try to do as much as possible is to show you the application of the material. Because in an anatomy class, it's really easy to say, okay, this is the greater trochanter of the femur. This is the lesser trochanter of the femur. Can you pick them out? Okay, cool. But why does that matter? Why is it important that you know that? Well, the greater trochanter, which is this part of your hip out here, is important because all of your rotator, most of your rotator muscles of the hip insert there. In addition to that, there's a bursa, a little fluid-filled sac, on the lateral portion of that can get inflamed or irritated if you have a tight IT band, and so that can cause hip pain, right? So that's kind of the significance of that structure. So what I'll do then is talk about what the femur looks like, what the landmarks are, all of that kind of stuff, and then I'll show you how to apply that. So for example, I'll tell you a story about a guy named Phineas Gage. So Phineas Gage, in the fall of 1848, going way back to the 19th century, in the fall of 1848, he is a construction foreman for a railroad company. And so Phineas Gage, in 1848, he's construction foreman, says a lot. He's a very responsible guy. All the people that work for him, he's well liked. They say he's a really good planner. He's careful with his money. He doesn't just, spend it frivolously. He's also a teetotaler, meaning he doesn't drink. So he's this very responsible guy, generally well liked, easy to get along with, all of that kind of stuff. And so as construction foreman for this railroad company, Gage's job is to flat out the rail bed. So basically to make sure that the rail bed is as flat as possible so they can lay out the ties and lay out the rails. And so the way that his crew does that is by using explosives. And so in September of 1848, they have to go through a rocky outcropping outside of the town of Cavendish, Vermont. And so the way to get through this rocky outcropping is going to be with explosives. And so the job of his crew is to drill into this rock, and then they're going to put gunpowder in that drill hole. They're going to pack it down. It's called tamping. They're going to pack it down with a fuse, and then they're going to put sand on top of it, and they're going to string all the fuses together, and they're going to blow up the outcropping, right? So that's ideally how it goes. In order to tamp that gunpowder into the drill hole, they use something called a tamping iron. Now, Gage has one that he's had specifically made for him, and the tamping iron that he's had made for himself is 3.5 feet long. It basically looks like a big, long metal spear. So it's 3.5 feet long, weighs 13.25 pounds, and it's 1.25 inches in diameter. And so he is then tamping this gunpowder into this hole, right? So just mashing it down when there's an accident, there's an explosion. And so the explosion actually drives that tamping iron through his head, goes underneath his left cheekbone, which is the zygomatic arch, goes underneath his left cheekbone, comes out through the top of his skull, goes clean through, and lands about 3 yards behind him. After the explosion, Gage falls about 7 or 8 feet back. His men go to tend to him to make sure he's okay. They assume he's dead. Turns out he's not. And not only is he not dead, he's conscious. And he's actually fairly lucid. So he's fairly with it. And so the men say, okay, well, he's alive. Let's go take him to a doctor. And so they load him onto an ox cart. They take him to the nearby town of Cavendish, Vermont, and they deposit him on the steps of a saloon while they wait for the doctor. And so the doctor shows up a little while later. I always mess up his name, so I want to make sure I get it right. His name is Dr. Harlow, Dr. John Harlow. So Harlow shows up to tend to Phineas Gage, and supposedly Gage is with it enough that he tells Harlow, here is work enough for you. He's got this huge hole in his skull. He tells the doctor, here's work enough for you. And so in 1848, what kind of medical treatments might this doctor be able to provide? Give him antibiotics? No. A whole lot Harlow can do for him. Basically, Gage inside, cleans up the wound, cleans up any debris outside of the wound, and leaves it open. He kind of puts some packing on top of it and just hope for the best. Despite the no antibiotics, he does get at least one infection, but he's able to survive. And so he survives, he recuperates. It takes him about 2 months, and then within 2 months, he's able to return to work on his family's farm. And so here's a picture of Gage after the accident. So you can see that he lost his left eye as a result of the accident, because again, the spear went under his cheekbone, it actually severed his optic nerve, comes out the top of his skull, and so that's the tamping iron there. So after the accident, however, when he goes back to work on his family's farm, everybody realizes that he's not quite the same. So remember that I told you that before the accident, he's well liked by his men, he's a good, careful planner, he's, doesn't spend his money frivolously, all of those kinds of things. Well, after the accident, his family says that Gage is no longer Gage. He's obviously different. So afterwards, he basically can't formulate any sorts of plans. Like he's incapable of long-term planning. He can't be like, okay, I'm going to go try to work for this company and work my way up, or any of those kind of things. He basically make a plan, and then it'll change a few minutes later. He can't stick with anything. In addition to that, he's really stubborn, and he's really hard to get along with. And he's very impulsive. He'll just do something, right? Even if that something is socially inappropriate. Apparently he cusses a lot after the accident, even though he never did that before the accident. So my question for you is, why? Why before the accident was he this very sociable guy that everybody liked, easy to get along with, all that stuff, and then after the accident he's so different? What has happened to him? Obviously his brain has been damaged. Yep. Okay. Yep, good. So nerve damage, right? So we've damaged some neurons for sure. What else? Any other thoughts? Yep. Very good. Yep. So in this case, he's damaged his left brain. Absolutely. Yep. And so the left brain is oftentimes described as being the logical part of the brain, the analytical part of the brain, and so that's what's been damaged for him. So specifically, the area of his brain that's been damaged is the left prefrontal cortex. So the area of the brain is responsible for all the things that you can see there: emotion, decision-making, and then what did I have last on there? Moral behavior. So that area of the brain affects how we get along. And so of the damage from the tamping iron, he's actually lost neurons in that part of his brain. He's lost nerve cells in that part of the brain, so he can't do those things. He can't do long-term planning like he used to be able to do. And that becomes manifest in his impulsive decision-making. He is not as aware of social interactions with people, which is why he cusses all the time and those kinds of things. So because of damage to that specific part of the brain, we get a very obvious set of symptoms. We also see that those or similar symptoms in a really common type of dementia called frontotemporal dementia, second most common to Alzheimer's disease in terms of dementias. And so the damage is to the same part of the brain. So when people develop frontotemporal dementia, they will present very similarly to Gage, where they used to be very social, so it affects their social interaction. And then they also engage in impulsive behavior. So sometimes when people have that dementia, they'll do things like shoplifting because they're not aware of the social norms. They don't have that part of the brain that tells them, hey, you shouldn't do that. So for example, It's kind of the way this part of the brain has been described as basically kind of like your conscience, in that if you have a big test coming up on Friday and one of your friends invites you to go out on Thursday night and you're going to be out late and not get any studying done and all that, and so your brain says, or your inner voice says, no, probably shouldn't go out, you should probably stay home and study. That's this area of the brain that's damaged, or in somebody with frontotemporal dementia. So basically what we're going to try to do in this class is I'll discuss the anatomy of the brain. We'll talk about the cerebral hemispheres. We'll talk about the cortex and all of that kind of stuff. And again, that can get kind of boring and dry. And so then to try to apply that, I'll present cases like this. Or I may ask you questions on the test that are very similar to this. So one of the ways that I'll ask test questions is to say, this person got Parkinson's, what brain might be affected by that. And so I'll kind of use that to get you to apply the material about what different parts of the brain do. And so if they can't do a particular activity anymore, what part of the brain might be affected. I'll do the same thing with the musculoskeletal system. So if somebody has too much translation of the tibia, meaning their shin moves too far forward relative to their femur, what ligament might be damaged? That would be another way to do that kind of a thing. So again, as much as possible, I'm going to try to help you apply that information. So that's Gage's skull. It's actually on display at Harvard. There's an anatomical museum at Harvard, and so that's what his skull looks like. And so you can see, I mean, it healed pretty spectacularly, but you can see, obviously, the remainder of the hole still there. All right, so another question that's probably going to be more up your alley. I see most of you are at least interested in the sports, if not athletes yourselves or former athletes. So let's pretend that you're a basketball coach and one of your athletes lands like this. Is that a problem? Okay, a lot of yeses. I tend to ask questions that I know the answer to or I'm fishing for an answer to. All right, so most of you nodded yes that that's a problem. Somebody tell me why. Okay, yep. Okay. Some right foot, I assume? Okay. Okay, yep, so she could hit her knees together. That would be painful. Yep, okay. What else might happen if she lands like this habitually? Yep. Yeah, absolutely. She could tear her ACL or MCL. Very good. All right, so your ACL and your MCL, two of the primary four ligaments of the knee, both of them keep the knee or limit what's called the valgus motion, so where the knee buckles toward the midline. Both of them limit that motion, so if you excessively or let your knee buckle excessively toward the midline, let it collapse excessively, then that can damage to the ACL or the MCL. Good. So that's one of the main problems here. Yep. Could be a ligament issue. So maybe she's had an injury before, maybe she's doing this still, for sure. So given that she's letting her knee, or particularly her right knee, both of them to some extent, but particularly right knee, because that's buckling medially or toward the midline so much, why is that happening? What is not as good as it could be, other than potentially the ligaments are a little bit lax already? Yep. Okay, good. So she lacks hip strength. All right. So what types of muscles, or what specific muscles, if you know any, that'd be amazing. But what specific muscles are weak? Or groups of muscles? Anybody got guesses there? Then I'll be real impressed. Yeah? Okay, hamstrings are a good guess. In this case, usually her hamstrings are going to be a little bit weak, especially relative to her quads, the muscles on the front of her thigh. So she probably does have some hamstring weakness. All right, what else? Anybody else? All right, so the primary muscles that are weak for her are really two groups. Most likely, she may have some other stuff going on, but most likely her hip abductors, which are the muscles that bring your leg away from the line like this. So I'm using my hip abductors on my right side right now. Also her hip external rotators. So external rotation of the hip is where you take the front of your femur and rotate it away from the midline. So specifically, glute medius, glute minimus, those are your two AB, the top part of or the superior part of glute max. So a hip abductor. So those muscles are probably weak. The internal rotators, there's some underneath glute max, underneath your butt muscle, that are your external rotators, and we'll get to those later. There's 6 of those. So those muscles are probably weak. Also, she might have some weakness in her foot. right? That's allowing for that medial collapse. That may be part of the problem. So we could work on strengthening up her hip abductor muscles. We could work on her external rotators, her foot strength, those kinds of things. And hopefully then we could get to where when she lands, she'll actually land with her knees over her feet, and she'll absorb that impact in her quads, and then we'll reduce her likelihood of injury. All right, so let's say she does tear her ACL. Then go back and return to basketball player. Can she keep playing? Yep. Okay, yeah, sure. She might elect to get it fixed. She might not elect to get it fixed. It's going to be tough to play if she doesn't get it fixed, right? Let's say she does. Let's say she gets a surgical repair. Can she go back and return to play? Some of these are softball questions. Yeah, she probably can, right? So most likely, she probably can return to play. What's the rehab turnaround time on that? Yeah, 6 to 9 months, and that's doing really well. Maybe a year, maybe a little bit longer. So sometimes people talk about that it takes a year to recover physically and 2 years to recover mentally. So she's going to miss some time with that. So if we can prevent that, then that's going to be a big deal. Also, if she tears her ACL and gets it repaired, is her knee good as right? Okay. So in the bluish shirt, why not? Sorry, I don't know names yet. I will eventually, but I don't know names yet. Well, so what's different about her knee now than before? Yeah. Yeah, very good. So one of the things that's going to happen is there is some damage to the parts of the muscle that help you know where your muscle is in space, in addition to the ligament damage. So she's less aware of where her knee is in space. That's an important part of the rehab process. But also, try as doctors can, that repair isn't the same as the initial ACL. And so if somebody has an ACL repair, the odds are close to 100% that within 10 years they're going to have arthritis in that knee, right? And so if you got somebody that tears their ACL at 15, now by their 30s they're starting to have some arthritis in that knee. Their exercise is going to limit their health, all those kinds of things. So those are bad, obviously. And so if we can prevent that injury by strengthening those muscles, then that's going to be a big deal. So we're going to talk a lot about muscles. We'll talk about their origins, their insertions. We'll talk about their microscopic structure, all that kind of stuff. But what I'm going to try to do as much as possible is to focus on the so what. So we'll talk about the rotation of the shoulder. Well, so what? What's it do? How does it prevent injuries? How does it play a role in performance? So as much as possible, I'll try to tie it back into that stuff and not overly bore you with that. All right. So I'm going to skip this scenario for now because I don't know that we have time for that. All right. So some of you know me, one of you knows me at least, but the vast majority of you don't. So I am Dr. Shirley. So quick bit about me. So you can see all of my letters there. So I have a PhD, and I'll talk more about that in a second. I'm a certified athletic trainer. That's what ATC is. So if you're familiar with sports, the people that go run out when somebody gets hurt, they go run out on the field and help them. I'm an athletic trainer. I did that before I got into this. I'm also a certified strength and conditioning specialist, which is the credential that most strength coaches have. There's all my contact information. There's my office, although we'll be doing WebEx chats this semester. So in case you want to walk by and wave, that's where that is. And then phone number and email and all that stuff. So from a biographical standpoint, this is my 5th year, or going into my 5th year here in Wisconsin. I originally grew up in Texas. I actually grew up in a town about 25 minutes north of Austin, Georgetown, which, fun fact about Georgetown, that's where Mason Crosby, he and I went to the same high school, and then Corey Knable, still with the Brewers, yep. So Corey Knable went to the same high school I did. So grew up just outside of Austin, and then did my undergrad at the University of Texas. Did it in general kinesiology. And all I wanted to do with my life was to be a strength coach. That was my goal in life, was to be a strength and conditioning coach. So at the undergrad level, I powerlifted at Texas. It's a club sport, kind of like rugby is here. But I was a powerlifter at the undergrad level. And so primarily because of that, really wanted to be a strength coach. So I got out of my undergrad with a BS in kinesiology and was a CSCS, interned in professional baseball. So keep in mind, this is almost 20 years ago, but I interned in professional baseball for a team called the San Antonio Missions. They were part of the Seattle Mariners organization at the time. Now they're the Brewers AAA, so funny how that works out. But at the time, they were a AA club in Seattle's organization, so I was a strength and conditioning coach for them for one season. Strength coaches in minor league baseball, they turn over every year. So you'll work for a team for a season, and then they'll hire a whole new batch of 7 strength coaches the next year. So there's not a lot of stability, and there's almost no money. It's like $1,200 a month. And so I was like, okay, I got to do something else for a living, something more stable. So I ended up being a high school teacher and coach. I was a history teacher because I minored in history in college, in undergrad. So as a high school history teacher, taught world history, world geography, coached football, coached receivers, women's basketball. I know nothing about basketball. I didn't then. I still don't. I was the head coach. I don't know. I even know even less about tennis, I guess is the best way to say that. So when I took the job, the athletic director's like, I'm going to make you the head coach. And I was like, I don't even know the rules. And he said, well, we'll get you a video. And he did. He gave me like a stack of VHS tapes and was like, here you go. You're the head coach. Have fun. So I coached tennis and then also coached powerlifting. Being a high school teacher and coach, that's a rough job. So I did that for a year and I was like, I got to do something else. And so I went back to school, got a master's degree in athletic training because I was like, well, if I can be a strength coach and an athletic trainer, I can do 2 jobs in one. So went to a master's at Steve Boston, which another fun fact is the same place that Dr. Kephart, the guy who's in the blue shirt in here, he did his undergrad and master's there as well. So I got a master's in athletic training, got out of there, interned for the Houston Texans for the, what would that have been, 2007 season. So interned for them just through training camp, not for the whole season. So interned for them, and then ended up going from that and working in minor league hockey. I was the head athletic trainer for a AA hockey team, the Austin Ice Bats. Check out that sweet logo. So they were a AA hockey team at the time. They were affiliated with the Minnesota Wild. Did that for a year. But as you can imagine, hockey in Texas doesn't really do that well. The Dallas Stars' current standings, notwithstanding. In general, it's tough to make money as a hockey team in Texas. And so the only year I was there was their last year in existence. They went bankrupt, which I'm pretty sure was not my fault. So they went bankrupt, new job, ended up working at Concordia University in Austin. So it was the program, the academic side of things. And so I was there for 8 years, and while I was there, in addition to directing their athletic training program, I also worked on a PhD full-time. So I got my PhD also from the University of Texas, and my PhD is actually in sport history. So it's in interdisciplinary sports studies, but it's basically in sport history. So some of those examples like Phineas Gage from the 19th century, those are the kinds of things that interest me. So I'll tell you a lot of like historical anecdotes like that because I did sport history. So I was at Concordia for 8 years, and then this is my 5th year here. So that's the basic biography. So you can get bonus points for you by telling me your biography. So in a normal semester, what I would do is have you come by the office so that you know where the office is, visit during office hours, all that kind of stuff. And then I'd ask you the same kind of questions, where are you from? What sports did you play? What do you want to do for a living? All those kinds of things. Why do you want to do that for a living? And we do that in the office. But of course, we can't do that this semester. So what you'll have to do if you want to get your 25 bonus points for telling me all of those things is you'll have to send me an email and we'll set up a WebEx chat. And the good thing about that is I'll be able to see you and vice versa without masks. So we'll know what each other looks like. So anyway, if you want to get 25 bonus points, send me an email, say, hey, I want to set up a WebEx chat with you. We'll schedule that, and then you can tell me all that fun stuff about you. And then the last thing on there is you have to be able to tell me a fun fact about yourself. So start thinking about that now. So sometimes they're really interesting, like I have a pet rabbit and I take it for walks and it has a little harness. That was one of the more interesting ones I've had. I was like, okay. And then sometimes people are like, I like football. Don't do that. That's not a fun fact. So try to come up with something interesting, because in part that helps me remember who you are too. So be like, oh, she's the one that has whatever. I was going to say a real one that I shouldn't say. But it'll give me something to remember about you. So there's that. Oh, and then also, I always do this, so I'm just going to keep doing this. Because it's difficult for me to memorize names, and it's going to be way more difficult this semester with all the masks, if you send me a picture of yourself, so that I can identify you to help me a little bit with names, then I'll give you 5 bonus points as well. So you can earn as many as 30 bonus points between the office meeting and then sending me a picture of yourself. Just make sure I can identify you. The other thing with the picture, please send it with your lab section. So say I'm either in the 8 o'clock lab or the 10 o'clock lab or the 12, because that's how I group them in folders, so it makes life easier for me. So tell me which lab section you're in when you send me that email. Don't say I'm in the Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9. I know. And don't say I'm in the Thursday lab. I know that too. So give me your lab time. All right, so since I'm asking you for a fun fact about yourself, I'll tell you one about me. So my fun fact is that Arnold Schwarzenegger himself called me a doctor of bodybuilding. Pretty big time. Yep.
One of my friends took your class, and I don't know if he was lying
Yeah, that's another one. I'll show you that in a second. But yeah, I do that. So there's obviously more to that story. So there's Arnold back in his heyday. And so the more to that story is, so as I said, I did my PhD at the University of Texas. And my PhD supervisor is this woman, Jan Todd. And so Jan was the one-time world's strongest woman. In 1977, she was named the strongest woman in the world. Her husband, Terry, here, is the only guy, I think, that was simultaneously world champion, or simultaneously national champion, in powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting. So because the two are fairly different in terms of the techniques of the lift, so I think he's the only guy that was simultaneously champion in both. And so anyway, Jan was my PhD supervisor. So she and Terry started the Stark Center at the University of Texas, which is basically this big physical culture library. So if you want to see muscle magazines from the 1910s, they have them. If you want to see documents on the earliest days of chiropractic, they have that there. Nutrition from the 1800s, they've got that there. So it's this massive library. But in addition to being a massive library, there are these big galleries that have artwork and all kinds of different stuff in them, different exhibits, traveling exhibits, those kinds of things. And so back in 2011, it's 11, give or take, a guy named Joe Weider, the guy there on the left, and then obviously that's Arnold. So Joe Weider was one of the guys that trained Arnold when he first came to the US. And Weider had massive collection, or he's a publisher of a bunch of different muscle magazines. And so Weider donated several $1 million to the university, so there would be a wing of the Stark Center named after him. So there's a Joe and Betty Weider wing of the Stark Center. So they had this big exhibition, big banquet whenever that happened to celebrate the donation. And so then Arnold came to that banquet. And so he was talking to Jan about what they do there and all of that. And he's like, yeah, I hear there's this guy. That was her only student. Jan said he has a student who is entirely studying the history of strength. And so he's going to be a doctor of bodybuilding. So I'm at this banquet and I'm sitting next to my wife and I'm like, I'm a doctor of bodybuilding. Did you get that? She didn't think that was as cool as I did. So anyway, got to meet Arnold. He bleakly referred to me as a doctor of bodybuilding. So I'll take credit for that. So the other thing is that, so I'm going to show you a quick video. I don't have the sound because of the way the computer's hooked up, but that's okay. So this is an event called the Elephant Bar Deadlift. The bar is extra long as opposed to a normal bar. And this is from the Professional Strongman Contest at the Arnold Classic Sports Festival. It's held in Ohio in March of every year. And so these are the 10 strongest guys in the world at this contest. And so this is them in the deadlift event. Shivliakov's going to get a nosebleed here in a second. There we go. So pretty intense event. I don't remember how much he's lifting there. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 pounds. So this one's from 2018, so when Shaw was still there. So it's Brian Shaw, Jerry Pritchett. So eventually here, Half Thor is going to pull 1042. This is way better with the sound because it sounds really cool, but oh well. But anyway, so my other fun fact is that right around 54 seconds, there I am. Get that to go away. So that's me as the judge. So one of the other things I do, so Terry, Jan's husband, organized the strongman contest at the Arnold back in 2000, organized the very first one. And then he was the director of all of them until he passed in 2018. And now Jan runs them. And so because of them, I get to go help out. So if you ever watch, like for this last year, if you watch the Rogue live stream, I'm always running around in the background asking for numbers and getting attempts and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I get to help out with the world's strongest man too on the side. So that's my other fun fact, and I do have one more, because why not? So my other fun fact is that I wrote a book, came out last December. I only have 5-star reviews on Amazon. There's only 2 of them, but both of those reviews are 5 stars, and I didn't write either of them, so I'm pretty excited about that. So anyway, that's my last fun fact. All right, so enough about me. What do you care about? How are you going to be graded? So this semester is obviously a little bit different. So one of the things I had done in the past was I would make students buy the fair description. Make students code so that they would have the book company software and they'd take quizzes through that software, and those are basically no-fail quizzes. The code costs like $35. We're not going to do that this semester. So those quizzes are gone. So all we have this semester are 3 normal tests plus the final. So a bit about tests, they're going to be rolling cumulative. So stuff from test 1 will show up on test 2. So they're not self-contained. It'll be, don't forget about the muscles of the shoulder, because you're going to be asked about those muscles all semester, not just. And then the final exam is cumulative. So the good news is, because we're only covering half of the body, it's not like the other class where it's like the stomach, the intestines, and rotator cuff muscles. So there's less material, but the final is still cumulative. Lab quizzes are going to be very different this semester. So I'll talk more about those in a second. And then there's a pathology paper. So the pathology paper is kind of like an introduction to scientific writing. You'll have to find 3 peer-reviewed sources and write 2 peer-reviewed sources, and write a 3-page paper about some sort of a pathology that is related to what we cover in this class. So that could be something like ACL tears. That could be, who's that quarterback that suffered that horrific injury that's coming back this year? Yeah, it could be an injury like that. It could be that, that lower leg fracture, right? There's some pretty terrible pictures came out of that one. So you could do something like that. You could do muscular dystrophy. You could do Parkinson's disease, because we're going to cover the system, those kinds of things, right? So that's what the pathology paper is. That's due at the very end of the semester. And then the grade breakdown is there. So do you need the book? Yeah. So I know it's a little bit easier because of rental and all that. It's cheaper than it used to be. It's not a $500 book. But yeah, I would definitely recommend the book. If I know the bookstore has the 10th edition, that's fine. Anatomy didn't really change that much in the last 2 years. Still pretty similar. So if you get the 10th edition, that works just fine. But that's what the 11th looks like if you get your hands on the 11th edition. And the reason I recommend the book is I'm going to try to keep the lectures as interesting as possible, which means or I don't go into as much detail as the book does. So the book is really helpful to really get into the details. I'm going to try to give you a little bit more of an overview and then the application stuff in class, and then get into the details with the book. So definitely want to get that. It is very useful. The other thing that you're going to want to get, so remember, I'm not making you buy the $35 code, but what I do want you to buy is Complete Anatomy. So it's the company that makes it is 3D4 Medical. So if you just Google 3D4 Medical, it'll pop up. They've changed the way they do it in the last year. It used to be like a self-contained app. So on my old phone, I had the self-contained app on the phone that was like $13. And I think you can still get that if you're an Apple user. I think they still have like a $13 or $15 option. If you're a Samsung user like I am, that's not an option anymore. So the way it works is it's a $35 subscription. And so that'll cover 1 year. Now that said, make sure you make yourself a calendar reminder of some sort to cancel that thing when you're done with this class, or when you're done with A&P2, Structure 2, sorry. Because it'll charge you $70 next year. So just make sure you cancel it before you get to that point. But it's a crazy cool program. I'll show you what it looks like here. So this is the basic screen of what that looks like. And so with this guy, you can do all kinds of different stuff. Obviously, you can spin him around and move him up and down and move him left and right and all that. But we can do things like we can add ligaments. So you can add different ligaments to him, and then we can zoom in on him. And then so we'll move him this way a little bit. So that's his knee joint capsule. So I'm going to hide that if it'll let me. Sometimes on this thing, there we go. All right, so we're going to hide that. And then, so that was the outer layer, and now we'll hide the inner layer. Okay. And then you can see cool stuff like his menisci, right? So some of you are familiar with the meniscus. Some of you may have torn yours. So there's his medial meniscus. And so then it gives you all kinds of information about those things. It'll tell you about injuries to it, treatments, etc. So there's all kinds of cool stuff on there. The other thing, and what we're primarily going to use it for, is the muscular system. So if we add some muscles to this guy. Okay, I'm going to have to zoom out so we can see some more. There we go. So we'll go to this muscle. We'll go to the vastus medialis. So when you click on that muscle, it'll tell you all about the muscle. So for lab, or for the lab quizzes, as it were, you're going to have to know 3 pieces of information about every muscle we cover. The origin, where it starts, the insertion, where it stops, and then the action. And all those things are on there. There's also little animations. If you kind of scroll this over, there's little animations, and it'll show you actually doing the actions of the muscle. So it's a really cool program. The other thing is that there are different models. So for example, when we get to, what else are we going to talk about? Let's do skeletal muscle. There you go. So there's an individual little skeletal muscle. and we can break out different parts of it. We can zoom in on individual muscle fibers. So as I move up a little bit, so there's an individual little muscle fiber, and then you can take things away or add things. And so, like I said, it's a really neat program. So definitely buy that. It's worth your $35. There's videos on there as well. So it's a really, really good resource. I'm kind of jealous that there's access to that now, not the way I had to learn this stuff initially. So definitely purchase that. And again, so that's what that looks like. So that's Complete Anatomy, worth your time. And then, so speaking of the labs, so the labs this semester, one of the things that we were told is that we couldn't require attendance. And so all of you probably got that email from me about a month ago that said either you can come in person. If you do, great. And so I appreciate everybody being here today. But if you can't make it for whatever reason, you're sick or tired of seeing me in person, whatever that is, then you can just watch the replays of the videos on YouTube. So I'll post this video probably about 10:30 today, and it'll be up in YouTube, right? So, but because we can't require attendance this semester, I can't do my normal lab quizzes. So typically, what we would do with our labs is you'd come into the lab, you'd play with the plastic bones, you'd play with the plastic legs and arms and all that kind of stuff. And then for the quiz, I'd put a sticker on, let's say that muscle that I showed you a second ago, vastus medialis, and I'd say, okay, what's the origin of this muscle, what's the insertion of this muscle, what's the action, etc. Quizzes are really hard. Can't do that this semester. So what we're going to do instead is those quizzes are going to run through Canvas, and I'll use essentially screenshots from the Complete Anatomy program. And so, for example, what I'll do is, we'll pull that up. Speaking of screenshots, but I don't need that. So I'll pull this up, and we'll go back to the original muscle guy. Full body. Come on. All right, and so what I'll do then, for example, is I'll say, let's see if I can isolate the tibia. So there'll be a picture on your Canvas quiz that'll just be a picture of the tibia. And I'll say, okay, click on the tibial tuberosity. So the tibial tuberosity is, as I move down, it's this little area right here. And so that's the insertion of the quadricep muscle group. And so what I will have done before you get to this on the quiz is I'll have drawn a little box that you won't be able to see kind of around this area. And so if the question is, where is the tibial tuberosity? If you click anywhere inside of the box that I drew, you'll get points for that. It's called a hotspot question. So that's how I ask the questions I would normally ask in lab where there would actually be a sticker on something. That's kind of what we love. So that's the other reason it's worth your time to have the Complete Anatomy is you'll have the same pictures, basically, that are going to be on the quiz. So that's how that's going to work. So the labs then are essentially discussion sections. So you don't have to come. We're not going to go over any new information in the labs. Essentially what we're going to do is so there's no lab tomorrow. Get that out of the way. We're going to start labs next Thursday. So next week we're going to start working on the shoulder, the bones and bony landmarks of the shoulder girdle, and then we'll also start working on the muscles of the shoulder. And so what labs are going to be then is an opportunity for you to come into the lab and play with the bones, so it gives you a 3D idea of where everything is, and play with the plastic arms. So it's an opportunity to practice. So like I said, no new information, just some more hands-on stuff. It's also an opportunity for you to ask questions. So that's what the labs are going to be this semester. What I'm going to do probably next Monday is to divide everybody up in case people, for the people who do come, so that, because I think the lab capacity right now is like 10, and there are as many as 15 people in a given lab. So I'll divide you in half and say, okay, you 7. So if we got the 8 o'clock lab, for example, you 7 come from 8 to 8:45. The remaining 8 come from 8:55 to 9:40. And that way we have a reasonable number of people in the room. So that's how that's going to work. So everybody's doing good on this. So normally I skip this slide, but this semester is different. So classroom expectations, wear a mask and spread out, because if you don't wear a mask, then I have to fill out paperwork. So just do me a favor, don't make me fill out paperwork. I'm probably going to start taking attendance, but it's for contact tracing, not for your grade, because again, I can't require attendance. So if I start asking you, if I start running through the roll, that's why. It's not that you have to be here, it's just in case somebody gets sick, we know who was here that day. Again, class attendance is optional. You can watch the videos on YouTube. So what I'll do after class today is I'll send an email with a link to the YouTube channel that all the videos are going to be on. And so that way you'll have all of those, and it'll include today's video. Again, all assignments are going to run through Canvas. Because this is a weird semester, please make sure you keep me informed. So if you get sick and you're going to be out for a couple weeks, or you're quarantined, or a relative gets sick and you have to take care of them, whatever it is, just let me know. Because sometimes students kind of just drop off the face of the earth and don't tell me anything. So for all I know, you're just like, college sucks. I'm not going back. So unless that's the case, make sure you email me, keep me informed, let me know what's going on. And that way I know, you're planning to return and all of that stuff. And I'll do the same for you. I have a 10-year-old son who is starting 5th grade on Friday. And so hopefully he'll be in person in school all the time. But if he's not, that's problematic. So anyway, I'll keep you informed if something happens with that, if they close the school down or whatever. Or if you see a kid in the back of the room, that's who that is. So anyway, I'll let you know if anything changes in my situation either. Check your Whitewater email. I'll also post Canvas announcements when things change. And then, if you do come to class, all the normal stuff. Don't sit there and watch YouTube the whole time, that kind of stuff. All right, so additional resources. So here's a picture from the complete anatomy thing. What I would suggest is to make flashcards for the muscles. It is super tedious, but it will definitely help you memorize the muscles much more effectively. And that's how I did it, and it worked out pretty well. So, and typically in previous sections of this class, when students have made flashcards, it's worked out fairly well. They've done well. So anyway, it's worth your time to make flashcards. What I would do is to print out a picture like this. So this is pec major. Print out a picture of that, stick it on the front of the card, and then on the back have your origin, insertion, action. That way on the front of the flashcard you'll be like, that's pec major or pec minor or whatever, origin, insertion, action. So that seems to be a pretty effective way to go about studying. All right, any questions? Okay, then I have a question for you. Who's that guy? Zydrunas Savickas. Yes, so possibly, arguably, the greatest strongman of all time. Obviously, Hafthor's got a pretty good claim to it as well, or Brian Shaw, but for my money, I'm going Zydrunas. And so, as you can tell, big fan of the history of strength and big fan of strongman and all that kind of stuff. So not coincidentally, my dog is named Zydrunas. So this is him when he was a puppy. We got him 3 years ago, so that's the day we got him. And because his name is Zydrunas, we had to be able to train him. And so he's got his little circus dumbbell. So that was when he was in his 1 year awkward phase. And this is what he looked like last week with his circus dumbbell. And you can also see down at the bottom, he has his little circus strongman. So anyway, that's my dog Zydrunas. All right, so no questions, nothing, really? Weird semester, no, nothing? Yeah. I'm gonna go Thor. Thor is a really nice guy, and he is impressively patient. Like when people ask to take pictures with him, I would be like, I'm good. And he stays there forever taking pictures and signing autographs, and he's a genuinely good guy. I like him a lot. Anything else? Nothing? All right. So remember, don't come to lab tomorrow, because there won't be lab tomorrow. We got to talk about the shoulder some before we can have a lab. So no lab tomorrow. Make sure you're here again, or if you'd like to, come back to class on Friday, and we'll talk about anatomical directions. We'll talk about planes and axes and superior, inferior, all that kind of stuff. So we'll do some nomenclature on Friday. So hopefully we'll see you then. Have a good rest of your first day.